entire, water course, that will actually vary. So, sorry, I think I'll keep my video off just to make sure that my internet continues to work. But anyway, so it was important that we go through this process so that we do know have a much more accurate understanding of what are the flood risks in this area. So that's why we undertook this. It's taken some time. This was a joint effort. We've had a partnership with Yavapai County Flood Control District, an excellent partnership. It's clearly that this influences Yavapai County. They will be holding a separate meeting to focus on that area and the outcomes of this study as well. And so you can see the outline, kind of the timeline here that we've undertaken. There has been other communications that we've conducted prior, you'll recall, over the last, certainly over the last 6 months to several years. So we appreciate your involvement, and I'm going to go ahead and I believe I turn it over to Linda next, correct? No, I'm sorry, to Michael Bishop, who is our representative with FEMA Region 9. And he will walk through the overarching FEMA program that this remapping was done. And we've also really appreciated working with Michael. He's been very supportive of all of our efforts. So thank you, Michael. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lucinda. It's an honor to be here tonight and a pleasure for sure. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time as well, because I think what you want to do is get into the details of the product itself. But I would have you all know that this project comes from the National Flood Insurance Program that produces flood insurance rate maps. And then underneath the National Flood Insurance Program, there is a funding mechanism that we use called Risk Map. And that MAP is an acronym that stands for Mapping, Assessment, and Planning. And just so you know what it means. And we get authorization to spend money on projects like this through this program. Our whole risk map design is such that we will do this work to identify hazard and risk. And then once you have this identified and before you can assess the risk, and you can communicate the risk to those that are in your family, in your community, in businesses, homeowners, the works. And then you can figure out what you might be able to do now that you know the details of the risk and the hazard, do something about it. And that is what we refer to as mitigate the risk. And so where we are right now is we're giving the opportunity to present the identification of the risk to you all through this process. And then the rest of the circle, we are wide open to hearing comments and sharing and working together to actually buy the risk down so people can be more safe and communities more viable for and resilient. So let's go on to the next slide, please. We wanted to let you know what this program looks like. For this context, it is really FEMA Region 9, which are the 3 mainland states of California, Nevada, and Arizona, of course. And then there's some Pacific Islands that are also included in our area of responsibility. In the state of Arizona, on the right, you can see that there are quite a number of projects identified. And these are some of the other areas that we are also partnering with the local communities and flood control districts to get the work done that they've identified as very important to them. That does the same process, identifies the risk and allows them to buy the risk down with mitigation projects. So in Region 9, we have 4 states and 3 territories. The territories, again, are islands in the Pacific. At this time, we have 70 plus ongoing mapping projects. In Arizona, we have 107 NFIP participating communities. So very active state for sure. And then the number of projects out of the 70 plus that we have ongoing in FEMA Region 9, 27 of them are targeted to update information in the state of Arizona. And so we're very excited when a project gets to a point where we are right now with the Oak Creek study in Coconino County and the Coconino side of the city of Sedona. So that, because it means that these data will soon be released and usable at the local level to do floodplain management and inform folks and allow folks to take corrective actions to eliminate hazards or reduce the hazards to a tolerable level. So with that, I think I do at this point turn it back over to Linda, and Linda, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Before I get into some details about the project, we do talk with a lot of acronyms. I wanted to define a few of those. FIRM and FIS, a flood insurance rate map and a flood insurance study. These are the documents that kind of govern the results of the study. When we talk about SFHA, that is the special flood hazard area. Those are the higher risk flood areas that are shown on the FIRM panels. Base flood is the 1% annual chance, meaning the flood has a 1% chance any given year of occurring. And base flood elevation talks about what the water elevations are associated with the base flood. The letter of final determination is after all of the checks have gone through with the mapping and the statutory appeal periods, FEMA issues the letter of final determination. And that happened about 5.5 months ago. And so we are looking at kind of the mid to end of March where the new maps are actually becoming effective. Next. Well, another thing that is a little bit of a strange concept is called the floodway. So the floodway is a portion of the high risk zone that's kind of reserved to carry the water without increasing the water surface elevation in the floodplain anywhere over a designated height. And typically that height is less than a foot. High risk zone, a lot of them in this study, we're going to have an A zone or an AE zone. Moderate risk in the orange color there is a 0.2% annual chance. So that's a little bit a lower risk than a high risk zone. And outside of these zones is what we were going to call the low risk. Next. This is showing the floodway concept kind of in a cross section. So this is as if you were standing on the stream and looking either upstream or downstream. The idea with the floodway is that the floodplain is encroached. Maybe it's with houses or development or other things that happen that actually can push the water into a higher elevation. Next, please. So what was studied? The map you see on the right is the entire study limit. So you can see that Oak Creek was basically studied from all the way up in the canyon to the confluence with the Verde River. It goes to the city of Sedona, and we also studied many tributaries or other flooding streams within the area that drain to Oak Creek. So you can see what we're looking at. For this particular meeting we have today, we're talking about the areas in Coconino County. And as was previously mentioned, there will be another meeting that'll happen. And the Yavapai portion of the study is a little bit bigger of an area with some more jurisdictions. So that is about 6 months behind as far as the maps becoming effective. Lucinda mentioned that this is the first complete study of Oak Creek in 30 years. So we have used the latest technology to come up with these updated flood risk zones. Next. Who was involved? So the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, through a cooperative technical partnership program led by Yavapai County, asked FEMA to help us with, fund the study for the community in conjunction with Coconino County and the city of Sedona, as well as the engineers and scientists who perform the study, community organizations, and all of you on the phone, the residences and business owners. Next. So this is an important part of the study, and this is how you can view what has happened to your property or maybe an area you're interested in. So on the website, there's a link to the flood map changes viewer. And what this allows on the screen is you can see on the left and on the right, there's the same area, but it looks a little different. So we've got the older study on the left and the newer study on the right. It's on the background. You can just type in your address, or you can zoom around just like you would in Google Maps or something like that. and look at what it was before and what it is now. So this link is posted on the website, and then we'll also have one for you later on in the presentation. Next, please. Just some summary statistics, and this has to do with what properties were zoned at before and what they're zoned at now. To explain this, the column that says in/in, so these are properties or structures, actually houses, buildings, those types of things that were in the special flood hazard area and are remaining in the special flood hazard area. Total in the entire project area, there's about 120 houses. Houses that are shown in the effective as being in the special flood hazard area, but are now going to a lower risk zone, there's about 55 of those properties. And then for ones that were previously in the lower risk zone that are moving into a higher risk zone, there's 13 of those. And ones that were not in the high risk zone before and also in the new maps, those are 221. So no structures, there's another 256 properties that are affected. Just to mention, the Oak Creek flood maps for Yavapai County will not be effective until about 2024. So the text there in orange, these changes won't happen for a little bit. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over now to Bruce Bender, and he's going to talk about changes in flood insurance.
Great, thanks very much for that. I'm going to call an audible here and go back, if I can, 2 slides. And I just want to emphasize to the people who are on tonight, and a lot of your friends and neighbors and business associates probably could not make it, maybe due to the storm, what have you. We have some who are in the valley that do business up there. The county reached out to many stakeholders, I think 17, 18 different organizations, to say, have the members come. So share with the members about this changes viewer, because if you're going to be building, if you're thinking of adding on to the building, which John will be talking about later, you want to see what your effect was. You want to see what your neighbors was. Promote this viewer, because it's a great way to see how have I been affected. And so what I'm going to be talking about is, okay, how has it affected flood insurance and the requirement of flood insurance and perhaps costs? And then John will be following me up from Coconino County to talk about how it's affected on building. But first, before I start, I want to just, we don't have time for a big flood insurance discussion due to time limitations, but I wanted people to know that FEMA for the longest time had a rating system that was built back from 50 years ago, 1968, when the program first started. It's kind of been based the same way. And the main 2 factors were the flood insurance zone that you heard Linda talking about, and Michael, and the base flood elevation. How high will the water come up, like the flood waters behind me, during that 1% annual chance flooding. But Congress directed FEMA to say, hey, you need something to be a little more actuarial sound. So FEMA created this new risk rating 2.0. And basically, as you can see on your screen, there are a lot more rating variables involved than ever before, including bringing in additional sources of data from what are known as catastrophe models. So it's not just FEMA data alone, they're using outside sources. So the one thing that has changed that that affects our discussion tonight is that FEMA is no longer using the flood maps or that the flood map zone or the base flood elevation for flood insurance. They still use it for floodplain management, still need it for permitting, still need it for lender requirements of flood insurance, but not used directly for rating. So what you may have heard about other map changes that have occurred in Coconino County and or Yavapai County, depending where you live or work, certain things have gone away, like a thing known as grandfathering is no longer there. So let's take a look at the 4 different potential effects or not effects. The first is properties that you'll see some, as we saw on the chart that Linda just talked to you about, You have properties that are newly identified to be at high risk. They went from a moderate low risk zone X to a high risk zone AE. Next those were that base flood elevation, that 1% annual chance flood will maybe increase or decrease. You'll run into a few where they were going from newly identified to be at high risk. They were at high risk and now newly identified to be at moderate or low risk. So they went from the zone AE down to a zone X from a risk level perspective. But most of you, as you saw on that chart, aren't going to be affected at all. But this is a good time to check in with your insurance agents and say, hey, am I properly covered? So, especially with the risk we have these days of, the wildfire and flood follows fire, it's a good idea to check your coverage, make sure you're properly covered. So here we have zone X, and the new maps say, okay, you're in zone AE. So what happens is the federal mandatory purchase requirement kicks in. Now, that is not FEMA's requirement. That is a requirement that Congress put on the lenders to say, if it's in a high risk area, that zone AE, that special flood hazard area that you heard Linda talk about, you're going to require flood insurance, Mr. Lender. So most lenders are going to be required. However, FEMA has a one-time newly mapped discount that is applied. So if you happen to be a few of those that did get newly identified to be in a zone A or AE, you get a one-time discount. You have to have your policy purchased within 12 months after that effective date. And then you'll gradually go up into what's called the full risk rate. So you go from that discounted rate eventually to a full risk rate on that. So that was around before inflation increases. And in that case, well, the mandatory purchase already applies because it's in the zone zone AE. But as I mentioned, the rates under risk rating 2.0 no longer include flood zone or base flood elevation. So a increase or decrease of BFE will not affect the cost of flood insurance due to that change in base flood elevation. Something a little new and different. I did tell you another scenario would be those, and we have a few of those that it did happen due to this better technology that Lucinda and Linda were talking about, where we actually see the floodplains shrink. And so houses that were in the old maps in a high risk area now are in a moderate or low risk area. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I brought along a cold from just coming back from Colorado. So, what does that mean? Oh, excuse me. I'll try to finish up quickly. This means that the federal flood insurance requirement no longer applies. Rates are based on risk rating 2.0, which doesn't include flood zones or base floods. So there's no change in the cost just because you're now in zone X. However, the risk is reduced, it is not removed. And in Arizona, more than 30% of all flood claims in Arizona are in these moderate to low risk areas. So what do we say? Excuse me. Keep your home and contents protected because there's still a risk. But as you saw, many of you are not affected at all. But you're still at risk, so it's important to know the risk. If you have flood insurance, check with your insurance agent to see, are you at current replacement cost? You have contents covered. And let's say you don't have flood insurance, call your agent, get a quote, see how low that cost can actually be, especially up there with the exposure to flood after wildfire. Coverage is really highly recommended. So let me summarize quickly before I lose my voice here. If you see an increase in in risk, you go from a zone X to A. There's that money saving option known as the newly mapped discount. And you start with a lower cost policy and go full risk rate. There's no increase in base flood elevation, no change in cost. And if there's a decrease in risk, you're going from zone A to X, again, the risk is reduced, but there's no change. Let me go back one. And if there is no change, check to make sure you are fully covered in both contents and building. So I apologize. I actually came back a day early to avoid the storm. I was up in Colorado visiting family, and we decided, let's meet the storm. But unfortunately, it looks like I brought back a cold. So I apologize for the coughing through that. We'll give you at the end places to send your information. We were recording this, so if you couldn't quite hear me through the cough, they'll be placed up on the website. So send your questions in. And with that, I'm going to get off screen real quick and pass this on to John Carr from the county to talk about the effects on building requirements.
Thank you, Bruce. Again, my name is John Carr. I am, excuse me, the engineering supervisor for community development, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the effects of map changes on building requirements. Next slide, please. So when are floodplain permits required? So they're required whenever you have proposed improvements or repairs in a FEMA special flood hazard area and in Coconino County. And I make that distinction to kind of go on top of what Lucinda and Linda said earlier, which is that this is a full study of the Oak Creek watershed, but only the portion in Coconino County is going forward at this point. It'll be approximately 6 months before Yavapai County goes forward. So next slide, please. So let's take a look at an example project. So I picked a parcel down here, and we're going to check what the permitting requirements are for the previous map. And when I say previous map, that means the map that will be in effect until March 21st, at which time the new maps will go into effect. Next slide, please. So here we have, and I think you might have to toggle through these, Bruce. Here's an example. In the upper right, it shows the various FEMA zones. And as you'll see there, there's 3 of the 4 zones are called special flood hazard areas. Those are the zones that would require flood insurance, a floodplain permitting. And where we've placed the house now is in that gold colored area. So go ahead and click again, Bruce. This means that there are not floodplain permits are not required because the proposed work is not in a special flood hazard area. Next slide. So now let's go ahead and check the new map. So the new map, we've placed the house in the same location, but this time it is in a special flood hazard area. It's in that cyan colored area and also in the 500 year. Because it's in that special flood hazard area, a floodplain permit will be required. And the house would have to be elevated such that the lowest floor is 1 foot or more above the base flood elevation per the new flood maps. Next. So now let's try another location. And this time we've put it way over on the far side, and not a very practical area to have a home, and it probably wouldn't meet setback requirements. But I've placed it here to illustrate that if you're in a FEMA special flood hazard area, and in this case, a floodway, the requirements ratchet up even more than the previous case. Next slide, or next click, please. The floodplain permitting requirements would be, again, to elevate the lowest floor to 1 foot or more above the base flood elevation. And then you also have to provide a no-rise analysis prepared by a professional engineer. And those can be costly. So there is a financial cost in building in a floodway. And we certainly discourage ever building in a floodway. Next slide. So what can happen is that because of limitations of scale and topographic definition, there may be some homes that are placed in a special flood hazard area that actually are not. And what you can do to have that removed is go through a process called a LOMA, which is a letter of map amendment. And what we'd be looking at is on that figure on the left, if the lowest adjacent grade next to the house is above the base flood elevation, or in our case, the regulatory flood elevation, because we have a freeboard of 1 foot. So it's 1 foot above the BFE. If it's above that, then the home can be removed. And if you have questions, if your house fits this situation, please contact us and we can help you through that process. Next slide. And now I'll introduce again back to Lucinda Andriani, who will talk about resources.
Lucinda, are you with us or on mute? I've lost you.
Bruce, I'll go ahead and finish it up here for Lucinda. I believe she has lost her internet connection. So just to review our project timeline, you can see where we are. We're at the very end of this very long process. And now is the time where you can start to submit any letters of map change that may be needed. Next slide, please. Helpful resources. So this is a very important slide here. We've got a lot of links, and I know that these links don't help you when you're watching this on your screen. However, we do have all of these posted on the Coconino County website. That's listed right there under flood map project overviews. So the Coconino County website /FEMA floodplain remapping. And on that, you'll have a link to the Oak Creek Canyon map changes viewer. And we're not going to take any questions tonight. However, we are going to take these via both email and phone number. On there under flood map questions, we've got the email address for you as well as the phone number. Building requirements. If you have any questions about what John Carr talked about today on building and development, that would be to go through the Community Development Engineering Division. Same phone number there. There's also a link to permits. The FEMA Map Service Center, that's kind of the website that houses all of the FEMA data. You can look at new maps, old maps, and get a whole bunch of good information off of that website there. And any questions or information about flood insurance, a good website is floodsmart.gov. Next slide, please. Thank you for attending. For very specific questions, here is the link to the website and the phone number. And Sandra Phillips from the city of Sedona is here as well. Sandy, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you again for attending. And if you're within the city of Sedona city limits, you can call Coconino and they will forward you to the Public Works over here at the city. Or you can call the Public Works here at City of Sedona and we'll direct you to all these links as well. So thank you again for attending. And if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you everyone for attending, especially with the crazy weather that we're having out there. So we'll leave this on the screen for a little while if you want to jot down any of this information, and thank you for attending.
There is a question, somebody's asking, will the recording and slides, when will the recording and slides be available?
Hey there, John. As soon as I can get them uploaded, I will go ahead and do that, and I will post it on the main page. So they will have a link to the YouTube. So I have to download and then upload for it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You bet. And I'm going to shut it down now. Okay. Thank you.